Mr. President, fellow Rotarians and guests. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce Colin Dunsford today. Apart from being mates of about 40 years or more, Colin has been a very successful businessman, and he's also been very successful in the community, and as you all know, he received an AM in Queen's Birthday Honours list recently. But today he's talking about the arts, and one of Colin's, I wouldn't say passions, but one of his, he enjoys theatre and the ballet and the opera and the concerts. And at the present moment, as Colin normally does, he likes to put things back into the businesses that he enjoys. And as past Vice Chairman of the Adelaide Festival for 3 occasions, he has been President of the Opera SA and is on the board. And recently he was appointed as Chairman of the Adelaide Symphony Orchestra, which, as you all know, is probably, from our point of view, the best orchestra, but according to those people who know, we're the second best orchestra. And Colin's job is to make us the best orchestra. So without further ado, I introduce to you Colin Dunsford.
Thank you, Anthony, for those generous comments and introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to be here today to talk about the subject, which is really the arts and my take on the arts in South Australia. What I intend to do is just give a bit of an introductory comments about the arts sector in a global sense. Then I'll just talk a little bit about some of the experiences I've had with the State Opera, as Tony mentioned, with the Adelaide Festival of Arts and more recently the ASO. And then I'll talk about just the way I see things today and some of the challenges and some of the opportunities. And then I'll happy to take questions, and I think we'll probably be talking more about the current situation rather than the history. But the history, I guess, just if nothing else, it gives me some insights into some of my comments and hopefully gives you some, well, I credentialise myself. So just by way of introduction, I trust that everybody here today would agree that major performing arts companies make an enormous artistic and financial contribution to Australian life. Numerous reviews have concluded that investment in the arts provides demonstrable social return and community benefits. The challenge for an arts company, however, and the fine arts or the major art companies, is to balance commercial reality with artistic endeavour. And I'll come back to that a couple of times with some of the examples or experiences I've had. And John, I see John Morfitt there, who was Chairman of the Adelaide Festival, I think in 2000, John, thereabouts. And I'll be making some comments, but you can nod or disagree during the question time, John. But there is that challenge for any arts companies to balance that commercial reality with artistic endeavour. And that is certainly a challenge for anybody on the board to get right. And it's an interesting challenge. This balance sometimes is made very difficult because of the funders' requirements, and a lot of the funding comes from, say, the Australia Council, which is a federal organisation, or the Arts SA, being the state organisation, and they require sometimes new works to be produced on a regular basis that may not always be attractive to the fine arts audience, which tends to be, and certainly in my opinion in the Adelaide scene, tends to be fairly conservative. No arts companies make enough money out of their performances to cover the performance expenses, and this will not change in the foreseeable future. Therefore, public funding is a fact of major arts companies' life. The cost-revenue dynamics also see expenditure increasing at a greater rate than income growth. Any other organisation, non-arts organisation in that environment, has been able to make substantial efficiency and effectiveness gains through the application of technology to their business operations. For an arts company, that is almost impossible. For example, it takes the same number and composition of musicians for the ASO to do justice to a Mahler 9 in 2013 as it did when the Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra premiered the work in 1912. Now, just by way of some of my experience and background, I think Tony, well, I don't think he did, he hinted about my Philistine background. I don't come from an arts background at all, certainly not on my father's side. My mother wasn't a bad singer, but that was mainly at church, and unfortunately I didn't attend church any longer than I needed to, so I never tested the tonsils. But I remember saying to my mates, I described myself as a Philistine with a capital F, and they readily agreed, and they also thought I was a shocking speller, which I thought was a bit unkind. However, my first exposure to the arts, other than I guess the Beatles concert in 1964, which was the highlight that year, was I did a review for the then Minister for the Arts in the early 90s, being one Diana Laidlaw, and that was to justify additional funding for arts companies in South Australia. I'm not too sure why I was picked, but anyhow I was, and she asked me at late notice to come along to Cabinet on the Monday morning, I think it was, 7:30 in the morning. 7:30 on a Monday morning is not necessarily the best time for me. Depends on how the weekend went, but in those days I must have stayed sober the day before. And anyhow, as I went along, she said, "Oh, Colin, I'd like you to present the executive summary to Cabinet." They were back in the days of Olsen, Brown, and Stephen Baker, etc. So it was just after the State Bank and what have you. There wasn't a lot of money around. And anyhow, I made the presentation. And then obviously questions, and Stephen Baker, who I'd known since my primary school days at Kernelight Gardens, he thought he'd get me in one, and he said, "Colin, how can you justify any additional funding for arts organisations in South Australia when we per capita in South Australia spend more than any other mainland state?" And as I said, I must have got to bed early the night before, because I came back with a no-brainer. I said, "Well, it's a very simple example I can give you, Stephen. Do you want a half an orchestra or do you want a total orchestra?" Anyhow, there weren't a lot of other questions. Di got her funding, and I'm not too sure whether it was a reward or otherwise. I was then appointed to the board of State Opera, and soon thereafter the chair retired because of a conflict of interest. It was Tim O'Loughlin. He actually went on to be the head of Arts SA, and I got a phone call at home, and my wife Lib, who was more into the arts than I am still, she could hear this conversation, and I obviously said to Di, why would you want me? And she came back, I said, "Oh, that's right." I said, "I don't know anything about opera." She said, "I don't want you there to know anything about opera, I just don't want any surprises." So anyhow, I went on to become chair of State Opera. I've got to say it was an amazing experience. We went through some great times. I'm pleased to say we didn't have any surprises. We had I think we had a small surplus every year. During that time, we put on Parsifal, which was a sort of a preemptor to the Ring Cycle. We did Dead Man Walking, which was the first occasion that had been presented outside the US. Some of you know the movie. Teddy Tahu Rhodes had the key role there when Teddy Tahu Rhodes wasn't really known that well. That was stunning. I guess the most stunning aspect of my time was the 1998 Ring Cycle. We took a no-risk approach to that. We parcelled up the production from Paris, covered the French franc from a currency exposure, but that was highly successful. I think 70% of the audience more than 70% came from interstate or overseas. They were here, as you know, with the Ring Cycle for a minimum of 5 days to see the total cycle. They are high net worth individuals. They stay in the best hotels. They visit the Barossa Valley, the Kangaroo Island, etc., etc. So that was a stunning success. But more particularly, we then did the 2004 Ring Cycle. I wasn't chair at that time, albeit I was there in the early planning days. And that was the first Australian production. You've got to realise that when the Ring Cycle was done in 1998, that was the first time that the Wagner epic had ever been done in the Southern Hemisphere. So that was followed up with an all-Australian production in 2004. It did have some financial challenges because as I said before, when you try and balance that, the artistic excellence with the financial aspects, you'll always have a challenge. So there was some bad publicity about the ring cycle, albeit it was world acclaimed as being one of the best ever. One other comment I just want to make about this balance of commercial reality with artistic endeavour. I remember Stephen Phillips, who was the CEO for my whole time when I was chair. He came proudly to the board meeting to talk about next year's program, and he said, I'd like to suggest to the board that we do four major operas next year for main stage. And I sort of looked at Stephen and I said, well, why would we do four? And he said, well, they'll be so popular. I said, but Stephen, where's the $250,000 or $500,000 going to come from? Because every opera we put on costs us between $500,000 up to $500,000. So the penny dropped with Stephen, and I can say to his credit, from then on he ran a brilliant ship, and with some outstanding successes with the operas that he put on. Sadly, and I do regret it, I was involved in another review to justify why we would do another ring. And it would have been done by now. It was planned for 2010 or 2011. And John Hill was the then Minister of the Arts, and I remember presenting the report to him, and he said, well, what's the damage, Colin? And it would have been a redo of the 2004 production. And the reason we're going to do that is that we'd surveyed every attendee for the 2004 ring, and 70% of them said they'd come back to see the same production, albeit it would be with different singers, etc. So we were confident it would be a huge success. Sadly, the then government couldn't estimated between $5 and $8 million, and I think from a state point of view, we lost a huge opportunity. We'd be the ring city of the Southern Hemisphere by now if we'd actually done that the third time. As you know, or some of you know, the ring is actually being produced now in Melbourne as we speak. The second production starts, I think, tomorrow. I think Chris Michelmore might be on a plane there as we speak. So the other benefit too that we got out of the ring was that we had two magnificent conductors in Geoffrey Tate and Asher Fish, and the ASO still say that was one of the best experiences they ever had. And if you actually track the improvements of the ASO over the years, a big factor would have been the time that they spent with those two amazing conductors. Anyhow, I move on now to around about 2000, and this is to do with Adelaide Festival of Arts, and there was a sort of a missing $1 million. It wasn't really missing, it was pretty easy to find, but once again it was this challenge of the commercial reality with the artistic endeavour. I think Robin Archer was the director of the 2000 festival. It was highly successful, but when the new director came in or thereabouts for the funding for the 2002 festival, there was $1 million. Somebody said, well, hang on, where's the $1 million gone? Well, the fact was that the 2000 festival had made a $1 million deficit. They needed to pump in $1 million to meet all their liabilities, and of course, but that was taken out of the 2001 and 2002 grants, so there's $1 million missing as such. I was then put onto that board, and John, that was your time if I recall? Peter Sellers, sorry to remind you, but Peter Sellers, if you recall, was anyway, nightmare. But once again, trying to get that balance between artistic merit and the financial viability was just impossible. I was chair of the finance committee, and I remember Peter coming in and presenting his program, and I'd say, but Peter, does it meet the budget? Yes, don't worry about that. Well, he spent more money on associate directors than, well, there wasn't much left for the program. We then had a hiccup with a particular ad, which was described as the Hitler ad. Actually, it had a very compelling story, but nobody ever saw it, never went public. And unfortunately, Peter Sellers didn't see his 2002 festival. Sue Natras, an arts administrator from Melbourne, stepped in and did a minimalist program with what was left. Then after that, I had Stephen Page, was the artistic director, I think it was, for 2004. It was a very safe festival. It didn't really blow people away. And then 2006, I was still there, but 2008, Brett Sheehy did two festivals, and he brought them back to where they are, or where they were before. If I was asked then, if you ask me now, would I have a festival on every year, Adelaide Festival of Arts, my answer would be no. I think there's too much competition for whether it be sponsored dollar, etc., and it's not unique being if it's every year, because everybody else has one every year. I think the fact it was 2 years actually made it unique, and we could argue on that basis. But anyhow, that I was never asked, and so you move on. Then I was appointed the ASO, and I've got to say my time to date with the ASO would have to be the most challenging role that I've ever had, and I'm talking business. And I went through a couple of mergers, and I went through the debacle of Arthur Andersen, and etc., etc. So I've been in some interesting, challenging personal times, but the ASO is particularly challenging. And the reason being is actually the dynamics of the players. It's something you don't normally have in an organisation. You might say, well, the players are the equivalent of the staff. No, they're not. These are highly educated, passionate, probably double degreed. They have been training in their particular art form probably from the time they were 5 or whatever. A lot of them would come from a parental background of perhaps being orchestra members themselves, but certainly strong in the fine arts side of things. They are a different dynamic, and dealing with them, and in particular the EBA, is not without its challenges. However, everybody recognises what an amazing organisation they are, and the quality that they produce. I mean, it was called not a blind tasting, Tony, but it was a blind listening, and the Adelaide Symphony Orchestra voted number 2 in that. And you say, well, a big deal. Well, not really. When you think our complement of players was 75 and the Sydney Symphony Orchestra 120, that's significant wind power, etc., that the Sydney Symphony Orchestra have over. So with our resources, to be number 2 was amazing. And I can assure you that Melbourne Symphony Orchestras and others have certainly got their nose out of joint. I was criticised by the players, just by way of example, that, Colin, you haven't promoted the fact we're number 2. And I said, I appreciate that, but how do you actually say you're second best? It's a hard one. So if there's any marketers out there, please give me some hints about how you can actually tell everybody that you're second best, but be that as it may. The other thing about the players, they are, they're full-time. We've got 75 full-time players. They are reasonably remunerated, but they're not appreciated. Can you imagine a Crows player walking down the Rundle Mall? There'd be a number of people trying to grab their signature, autograph, etc., whereas you could have one of the best violinists in Australia and the world walking down, and they probably think, well, there's a busker that's going to set up down in the Rundle Mall. So they are, in my opinion, underappreciated. So one thing I didn't mention, and that was the concert hall. I've got to put in a plug. The players would kill me if they knew if I had this opportunity. But we're the only orchestra in Australia that don't have a concert hall. So Tasmania has its own concert hall. So we don't have a home. We practice down in the Grange studios down in Hymie Street, and we play mainly the Master Series is done always at the Adelaide Town Hall. The acoustics are brilliant, but it only caters for 900 people. And then you go down to the Adelaide Festival Centre, which the acoustics aren't brilliant, but that can cater up for 1,800. So you've got to get it right. You don't want to have 600 people at a concert when it's 1,800. That looks pretty lonely from the players' point of view. So we're going through a business planning process as we speak to develop a plan to get a concert hall. I think it's a 5 to 10 year plan where we put in submissions to the old Royal Adelaide Hospital site, as well as development that Douglas Gautier is looking at around the Festival Theatre. It makes sense, in my opinion, around the Festival Theatre, and I think with what's been done across the river, etc., that would make it the entertainment centre of Adelaide, which I think is a good thing. And sadly, the ASO reported a loss last year, and will report a loss again this year. One of the challenges that I'll now come to I'll just make a comment. As far as the ASO, it is in good hands. We've just appointed a new CEO in Vince Ceccarello. In fact, we had a company meeting this morning with all the players, all the board and all the management, and he made a presentation. He was in day 12 at that stage. His goals, his values, etc., he will be stunning. He will do a great job. We've had great credentials. We'll have a new conductor this time next year. We're going through that process as we speak, but it does take a long time. And so, but we will have a new conductor to take over from Arvo after 10 years, who's done an amazing job. But so there are things in place. I had a strategic review done. I got the report from that only this week. So that really is a blueprint, hopefully for Vince to then work out a strategy to get the ASO sustainable and viable, but also appealing to a greater audience than we currently appeal to. So now, I guess I've come into the 2013. I'm told, sorry Tony, I've gone on a little bit. I'm told by many of my friends that really little has changed within the arts industry or the fine arts. They talk about an ageing audience, that's true, but I think everybody's ageing because of the health aspect. Everybody's living a lot longer, so that's nothing new. Arts are cyclical. There are times when things are popular and times when things aren't. I'll agree with that. The media have been incredibly positive about our orchestra and State Opera, for example, and for all good reasons, because they do put on stunning productions. But there will be a negative when we announce a loss for next year. That'll get a bigger headline than the fact that we've just done a magnificent job with Madame Butterfly, for example, both the orchestra and State Opera. The fact is that the planning for fine arts companies is sort of 18 months to 3 years, so it's very, very hard to be nimble. So if audience tastes change, it's pretty hard to sort of change the direction of that ship. So therefore we need to be very patient and optimistic. Nothing's really changed there. However, from my current point of view, I think there are some changes in dynamics. The impact of the GFC is still well and truly there. I think that hit a lot of our audience, and those people with the discretionary spend found that perhaps during the GFC they might have cut back on, rather than going to all the master series, they might have only gone to 50% or 75%, and they probably said, well, we actually didn't miss that. So trying to get them back on the boat is not without its challenges. Public company sponsorship. You go back 20 years ago, and I look around here, and I know you're all a lot of you are involved with public companies or large organisations. We're very generous towards the arts, but now it's got a tick the box. What's in it for the company? Does it tick the box from the values that we have as a company? So Santos, a huge supporter and sponsor, but they're saying to us, well, what's the value in it from our point of view? We want community, we want Indigenous. There are various boxes that they want to pick. So sponsorship is getting harder and harder, and of course there are less public companies in particular in South Australia than there were 20 years ago. There's great competition for that dollar as well. If you look at what Douglas Gautier is doing at the Adelaide Festival Centre, I mean, he was given a brief to reduce the number of dark nights. Well, I don't know if you've seen the program that he's come out with, but it's a big glossy. And I got something the other day for the month of January, and I think there's something on there virtually every other night in the month of January. If you wound that back 10 years ago, that would have been a dead month. They probably wouldn't have done anything in the month of January. So there's huge competition. Government funding, at best, it's CPI. At worst, it's less than CPI. So we're playing catch up all the time. And that's not likely to change in the foreseeable future, state or federal. New audience development is key. We just can't keep producing just for the master series. We're going to come up with new product and new audiences. We've got to get into social media. I'm not into social media, but things like the Twitter, the web page, LinkedIn, all those sorts of things. We're going to start using that because that's what the younger people do. The other thing is that the buying patterns are changing. In that people are making up their minds to go to something at the last minute. So single ticket sales may jump in the last week when we're about to split our wrists and say, should we actually stop a production? Then ticket sales can go through the roof. On a positive note, what I'm pleased to say is that our master series or our subscription tickets for the same time last year, are 23% up. So I'm absolutely delighted with that. Don't ask me why. Program, you possibly could say, I really don't know, but we're 23% up, so I'm heartened by that. Thank you very much.